Hello, thanks for joining us for Beyond the Stage. I'm Ruth Egerman. I'm the Director of Marketing at Livermore Valley Arts, and I'm here with our host and Executive Director, Chris Carter.
Say hey, Ruth. How are you?
Good, good. How was, it's a Monday here. How was your weekend?
It was really good. I went to visit my son for parent weekend at college. So he goes to school in Flagstaff at Northern Arizona University. And we went to the football game for homecoming. They lost by a lot. But I went to he belongs to a fraternity. So I went to a frat party. I haven't been to a frat party in like 30 years, I think.
You in a fraternity?
I was not in a fraternity. The school I went to did not have fraternities, but we were pretty close to Berkeley, to Cal right. Berkeley, and I had friends out there that belonged to fraternities.
Yeah, well, that sounds like fun, and you're back. Over the weekend, I watched a docuseries. It was just a 2-episode docuseries on Laurel Canyon. I saw it on Prime, and I was like, "Oh, I should watch this."
We've been talking a lot about that lately.
Yeah, we have been talking a lot about it, and I didn't really know the history and the roots of it, or any of just that it existed, and it was a hotbed for musicians during the, what was it, like mid-60s to about the mid-70s, I think.
Yeah.
What it was.
Yeah.
And it was absolutely fascinating, just incredibly fascinating. It was cool to hear one of the founding groups of it was the Byrds. They sort of kind of did that.
Yeah.
And one of the founders of the Byrds was Roger McGuinn.
Roger McGuinn, he's coming.
We'll be here in April, and I think we should get him on our podcast list. After seeing this documentary, I was just absolutely fascinated. It was so good. And it was just called Laurel Canyon. And then even part of the documentary was the concert in I think it was 1969, that happened here in Livermore up at the Altamont Pass Raceway, I think is what it was.
Yeah, Altamont Raceway with the Rolling Stones.
With the Rolling Stones. Yeah. And there were a number of folks from the Laurel Canyon group that performed there. And so that was fascinating. And, through this whole process, I'm like learning so much about music, and all this music that I listened to. I could see all of the album covers in my parents' music, I don't know if it was my parents, but our record collection growing up. And it was just so cool. So cool. And it was, I grew up in a flyover state, so we didn't connect anything with location or geography or anything like that. So it was really cool. And then now I live basically across the street from where the Rolling Stones played, if you were to say that.
Yeah.
not directly across the street, but I look out into the hills from my bedroom window and can see where they were playing. And it's so cool. So cool.
Yeah. And there's a lot of people around here that were around then. That kind of remember that time.
And I know it was tumultuous. It was a tumultuous time. It was that concert, specifically the one at Altamont Raceway, did not end well, but and I don't want to make light of that, but it's just, just the history. It just all comes through, and it's all told through the music and through the lyrics, and it's very interesting.
Who were some of the other Laurel Canyon musicians?
Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young all came out of that. Although I think it was really Crosby, Stills, and Nash, and sometimes Young, is how it was presented in Laurel Canyon. And I think that's exactly how it existed. You had Jackson Brown,
yeah,
Linda Ronstadt. Oh my God, who am I? There was a band called Love, which I'm not familiar with, that was really at the start of Laurel Canyon. The Eagles came out of that. I was going to
say, wasn't the Eagles there? Yeah.
There were so many. It was hard to it was hard to process how
Well, they would all just
influence.
like hang out all the time with each other, right? And
Yeah.
play with each
Well,
other and write together and all sorts of things.
and then on top of that, at the same time that's all going on in Laurel Canyon, you also have either neighboring Laurel Canyon or in Laurel Canyon, the whole Charles Manson stuff going on too. And so, I mean, that was all brought into this documentary, but it's just a really kind of fascinating time. Fascinating. And it's interesting because I think about music today and I think about some of the things that we've been through. And maybe this was because it was like the birth of rock and roll to some degree. It was the movement away, not away, but the movement from folk music, traditional folk music, to rock and roll, which and mixed in all of that are these protest songs that don't really come off as protest songs, but they are, and really just an interesting time. And I don't get that from music these days.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and I don't, and this is something that I've dealt with, being just not old enough to sort of be in that moment, just slightly not old enough.
Yeah, and I agree. I don't know if there are music communities quite like that nowadays. I mean, there's a lot of artists that work together, but it's
Right.
it's much more
Spread out.
yeah, and they're all professionals and it's more business like and it's
Yeah.
not quite the same.
Well, and that was one of
Mhm.
the things they talked about in this documentary was, a lot of the musicians talked about as Joni Mitchell was another one who came
Yeah.
out of that.
Wasn't James Taylor too? Was James Taylor there?
Maybe I don't recall. I don't
Okay.
recall. And so, but it was one of those, one of the interesting things they talked about as they got more and more successful, they stopped working together every day and stopped living together and stopped seeing each other, which had an impact on the creative process. So we've talked about so much on this podcast.
Yeah.
So interesting. Anyway,
Okay.
today, so that may be a podcast topic for another
Okay,
time.
we'll work on that.
Yeah. Today we are talking to Lindsay Deustch, that many people may remember from who played the violin at Violins of Hope,
Yes.
who's with her group Take3, where Bach meets rock, and it just sounds fascinating. And not only that, I found out today that she was also, Olympic quality racquetball player. So
An athlete, yes.
yeah. Yeah. So that was really interesting. She's very enthusiastic and very charming and just exudes energy both on stage and off. I really enjoyed the interview with her and what she had to say.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, very talented, and I think it's going to be a wonderful show. So,
Yeah.
looking forward to it. I hope everybody enjoys this interview.
Yeah. Thank you. Please stay and listen and enjoy the interview. Hey,
Here
there
she
she
is.
is.
I feel like in conservatory, we should all have the ability to learn how to use computers because look how hard this is. And all through that pandemic, too. It just never works on the right device at any time. But it's so good to see you.
Good to see you too. Lindsay, I'm the same way. I was visiting my son this weekend at college and I was trying to use Venmo and I had to give him my phone. I'm like, can you do this for me?
Oh, no.
God, we're getting so old. Well, and we've met before, Lindsay, because you've been at the Bankhead, and you were actually here earlier this year with Violins of Hope, right? That was probably the highlight of the year for most of us. So I want to say thank you for being a part of that. That was really amazing.
Yeah.
How did you get connected with Violins of Hope?
Well, that was also the highlight of my year. I wanted to say that. So I moved to Los Angeles from Houston. Oh gosh, I'm going to age myself here. 20 years ago, I moved there because I wanted to study with a particular teacher, and I'm sure we'll talk more about that later. But one of the first people that I met was Noreen Green, who spearheaded this entire Violins of Hope project. And she connected it to me during the pandemic. And it was one of those concerts that was scheduled and then took years to actually come to fruition because everything was moved by a year or two. And so I did my first Violins of Hope with her in Los Angeles. And then Lara Weber, who I've known since I was a child,
No
playing.
way.
Yes. I
Wow.
played her with the Disney Young Musicians Symphony Orchestra in Los Angeles as a 10-year-old.
Wow.
10 years old. And I met her all those years ago. And then fast forward 20 years, and she asked me to be a part of this at the Bankhead with Violins of Hope. And it's such an important project. I mean, the latest surviving Holocaust survivors are few. And so it's really important to keep that story alive. And I think that the worst thing we can do is to forget and to stop telling the stories. And so for me as an artist and entertainer, my voice is my violin. My voice is music. So to be able to express these stories through music and through the only thing I know, which is playing the violin, is really powerful. So thanks for giving me that opportunity to be there and to meet you guys.
Well, I have to say that it was just a magical moment for me. I'm, raised Jewish and raised in a temple with a Holocaust survivor. So have heard, our rabbi was a Holocaust survivor. And so I'd heard, so many stories growing up, and they're painful and they're difficult to hear. And yes, we need to hear them. And I was trepidatious about going to this concert. I really was, because I was like, oh, I don't know if I want to be in this space. And I have to tell you that the minute the music started playing and the stories were being told and the energy that you brought to the stage and the energy connection between you and Laura, it was amazing. And it was like, oh, this is actually about hope and resilience. And it was extraordinary. And I came out, and I think everybody I've talked to about that concert and then said, oh yeah, she's coming back for Take3. Everybody's been like, oh my God, she was amazing. You absolutely just brought so much joy and heart and soul to the stage that, man, I was like, we have to bring her back. We have to bring her back. Figure out a way to bring her back, because she was amazing.
Thank you for that. And thanks for bringing me back.
And actually, thank you for that, because it really was meaningful to me. And I know it was meaningful for so much of our community. So thank you.
When you talk about headspace, that's something that's really interesting to think about with Take3. It's just so joyful. So it's not hard to get into that headspace, because I love playing with my friends, and I love, creating covers of new songs and making them fresh and putting a classical spin on them. But the headspace needed for like the Violins of Hope, it does take a different preparation, almost like an actor, I would imagine, would have to get into that space to be able to convey that moment. And no matter what your day was, from morning until 6 p.m. before the show, all of that needs to melt away, and you have to kind of forward think to what you're about to do. And I do find that kind of to be difficult, for those particular concerts, because I don't do them often. But I'm glad that I was able to do my job, which was to tell that story in a way that made an impact on others. So
what was that like for you? I mean, to hold that violin, and I mean, does it feel different than other violins when you're playing it, or?
Oh, for sure. And part of the storytelling too is being able to understand everywhere this violin went, and all the hardship that it saw, all the happy moments that it saw before it ended up in the camps. So trying to get into the space of the people that were playing on it, it's very powerful, it's very emotional, and it's difficult to be in that space and play the violin sometimes at the same time. And you almost get into this zone, which is very powerful, where you're not part of the mix. So you're playing a violin, and you're telling this story, and then if you almost are able to remove yourself from this moment. And it's very odd, because I don't do that when I play in Take3 and when I do other shows. But for the Violins of Hope, That's what happens. And I think it's because of what you're saying, because I'm holding this instrument that has seen it all. And I'm trying to imagine where it's been. Having lived a very privileged life, it's hard to get into that space of everything that has gone on. But I know that violin saw it all. And so I have to take my experiences and lend it to this moment. So I'm glad that I had the opportunity to do that with you.
Yeah, thank you for that. And Ruth's right. After the show, a lot of performance, excuse me, a lot of people approached and were, commenting on how impressed they were with you and your performance. And they said, "Can we get her back?" So I said, "Well, as a matter of fact, she has this great trio that I think you'll love." And so, how is Take3? Like, what should we expect with Take3? And tell us about some of the other artists and what the show is going to be like.
So Take3 is my baby. I started it at an interesting time in my life. After graduating the Colburn School, I think a lot of musicians who graduate conservatory are under the impression that something magical is going to happen and people are just going to be lining up and ready to hear us play. And after I graduated conservatory, my dream was to be a solo classical violinist who, the one that comes out and plays with the orchestra and does half an hour and then goes away. And I did some of that, but not enough to make a living. And so right after graduating college, I was teaching, I was doing the occasional performance, but these performances are so difficult. I mean, to play the Tchaikovsky violin concerto in front of an orchestra takes years, decades, hundreds, thousands of hours of practice. And I would get done with the performance and the audience would come up to me and they'd say, that was so wonderful. And they'd say, I feel like you're almost as good as Lindsay Sterling. And so that's when I started to realize maybe I could lend my talents to something else. And I got a call from Yanni, who is a very famous pianist, composer, and I had never done any crossover whatsoever before that moment. And he said, "Would you come in 3 weeks to Saudi Arabia and be a part of our show, and that'll be your audition?" And I didn't know if I would be able to switch from classical to that genre. And I tried my best and I showed up, and it was a really beautiful relationship from the beginning. And I got on the plane after that moment. I got the job and I wrote down on a tiny airplane napkin my idea for Take3. And that was 6 years ago. We've been touring for 5 years now.
Wow. Well, I was going to ask you about Yanni because you since you brought that up, he plays in front of some pretty big crowds. What's the biggest audience you've ever played in front of now?
Probably that very first one, and it's actually a funny story because we wear in-ear monitors and it basically blocks out all external sound, or at least it's supposed to. However, that night there was a crowd of 30,000 people, and I stood up to do my first solo in the show, and I couldn't hear the click, I couldn't hear the track, I couldn't hear anything, and I had this out-of-body experience of, this is my moment and this is my audition and I'm failing and I don't know where I am, what to do, what's happening. And I looked over at Yanni and he was just smiling and so happy, and I guess my fingers were playing the right notes somehow. And it was literally the sound of the crowd drowning out everything else in my in-ear monitor. The other professionals near me probably knew they had to crank it up higher in a space like that, but I didn't know that. And the crowd is so different for something like Yanni versus something like playing a concerto.
Yeah.
And I really want to feel that energy from the audience as a performer to get, the polite applause. That's not what I live for. That's not what I want. I want energy from them. That's feeding me. That's making me love this moment. That's actually changing my interpretation of this song right now. And so without that, music just didn't have the same meaning for me as it does now with Take3.
Huh. Well, and you had this, when we saw you, you had this great stage presence. Did you kind of learn that as you performed with Yanni, or is that just something you've always had inside of you, because you really commanded the stage really well.
Yeah.
When you were here.
Well, as a child, I always was the one that wanted to move and express physically. And I'll never forget, I was a teenager and I was playing in a master class with my teacher in front of an audience. And I love him, Robert Lipset at Colburn. But on this particular day, he built a gate of chairs. He put chairs in a circle around me because I was moving too much. And I think that the classical genre, it's the way I grew up. I have such a respect and love for it. However, you've got to follow the rules. You've got to play every note exactly as it's written. And the goal for classical music is to figure out how to exactly interpret what that composer wanted. And I feel like for me as an entertainer and as an artist, I wanted to express what I was feeling. I wanted to tell a story that I had inside of me. And so now with Take3, nobody can tell me I can't move a certain way. Nobody can tell me that I have to follow any kind of rules. I can make crazy sounds. I can play way too scratchy and way too loud and just do things that I'm feeling in the moment. And there are no rules. So it's such a different way of expressing, and one that I'm so much more comfortable with. And I'm just so grateful that I even knew that that was an option for me, because from 5 years old till my mid 20s, I never ever considered playing a pop song on the violin. It never entered my mind of something that I would consider doing. And then after my experience with Yanni, I realized that if I really wanted to reach people in that kind of visceral way, it was probably not going to be through playing the Tchaikovsky violin concerto, at least for me.
Yeah. I have a feeling like if you played the electric guitar, you'd be the one like doing the slide across the stage on your knees, right? Is that you?
Yes. Can I do that at the Bankhead with the violin?
Please.
Sure.
Okay. Yes, please.
Let's see it. That'd be awesome. And on your website, it says you've toured with Yanni on, is it really all 7 continents or nearly all?
We've been everywhere. And with Yanni, he went to just all kinds of places. My very first show with him was in Saudi Arabia. And so it was such a different experience, and I hadn't done much traveling outside of the US. So I learned so much about the world and about cultures through that experience. And now Take3 does a lot of traveling abroad. Yeah, we play one show on cruise ships. We're the guest entertainers on cruise ships. And how that works is they helicopter us into the ship and we play one show, and then they helicopter us out. And so we started doing that during the pandemic, and that has brought us all over the world. And it's worked out really well scheduling wise, because we schedule our land shows about a year or two in advance. And then with any extra empty space that we want to fill in, we, go on these ships and perform.
You just fly in.
What kind of music? Well, I know you're playing sort of the title of the show is Back to Rock, right? So what kind of music can our audiences expect to hear, or who can they expect to hear songs that they might recognize by name that might have a different spin on the stage?
So we play a little of everything, and that's kind of what we're known for. So we play oldies like Billy Joel. We play country music like Sweet Home Alabama. We play a lot of TV and movie themes like Game of Thrones, Pirates of the Caribbean, Pulp Fiction, Miserlou. We try to reach all the genres. We might even put in some Bieber, Despacito. And the Take3 twist is that when we play those pieces, we often mash it up with a famous classical tune. So one of my personal favorites is an arrangement of Bach mashed with Amazing Grace. Another favorite of mine is in Imagine Dragons song named Natural. And we combine that with Carmen, the opera. And so it's kind of our nod to our history, because we all studied at either Juilliard or the Colburn School. And we all spent our entire childhoods and our early adult lives really with our blood, sweat, and tears, learning all of those classics. And so I think to give it up completely wouldn't be us. It just wouldn't be our personality. So to be able to combine it in a way that everyone can appreciate and use the motifs that everyone knows, these famous classical pieces. We even sneak in Moonlight Sonata into Orange Blossom Special with Flight of the Bumblebee. So we do some kind of fun things with our music.
Well, it's interesting because I know for me, like I do not listen to a lot of symphonic music, and I think it's really great how you're kind of allowing this, or kind of introducing this whole audience to symphonic and classical music, but in a way that they're comfortable with. Because I think the hard part for a lot of people is they might want to come to see a show that's more symphonic. However, they don't know how to listen to it, or they haven't really been trained on what they're listening for, and things like that. I mean, do you have any advice for us, for the people like me who would like to get more into it and learn more and listen more, and how to listen to classical music?
I think Take3 is a good starter. And I've spent so much time thinking about this very subject, because when I started Take3, I started it as someone who was starting a business of any sort. And it's like, what do people want? How can I create something musical that the majority of people, 9 out of 10 people, are going to not like, but love with a passion? And I thought about how to create that. So I had to get into the mindset of your just standard audience goer. I mean, what do they want to see? First of all, they want to see something visually exciting, right? So a cello literally starts our concert running onto the stage playing cello and stands up for the entire first number. So that's already giving the audience something new, because I was so afraid when I created Take3. What if people are afraid to come to our show because they're worried that it's going to be too classical and it's going to be boring and it's going to be elevator music? And so it's been really hard to figure out how to market Take3 so that, yes, you're going to hear symphonic sounds. It's going to sound the same as it would if we were playing a classical piece. My violin was built 200 years ago, so it sounds the same as if I played Tchaikovsky concerto. We're just playing different music and we're using some different sound techniques to make it come across. But my worst fear is to alienate any audience member, so if they love classical music, I hope they'll love Take3. If they're not sure about classical music, I hope that they'll love the little tidbits that we put in there. And a benefit of that, what if they see our show and loved the tiny little phrases of classical music and went home and researched other groups that are more classical? That would be an amazing compliment to me. So I don't know if that happens or not, honestly. I have no idea, but I hope it does.
Well, we can survey our audience afterwards if you want us to send them an email.
I actually would love that.
I think just on the same side, and you touched upon this in your answer, was that there are people that have a fear of classical music, and it's more of a fear of not understanding what they're hearing. For me, it's like, do you like what you're hearing? Like, does it make you feel good? I'm not a musician. I'm not, none of that. I don't know how to read music or anything, but I do enjoy listening. And I enjoy listening to all types of music, including classical. And I've had the great fortune of working for some great symphony orchestras out there as well. So that has helped educate me a little bit. But even so, I still go to a show or a performance of an orchestra, and I'm not sure. I can't tell you if you missed a note. I don't care if you missed a note or whatever, or beat or anything. It doesn't make any difference if I enjoyed it. And I think that's one of the lessons of the performing arts, especially the high arts, like when you have, dance, ballet, or classical music, or opera, or anything like that. It is just a learning experience, and it's a learning experience that's unique to yourself in some way. Do you like it? And I think on the reverse, you're also going to introduce, and you mentioned this, some people who are real classical music nuts and wouldn't give the time of day to Billy Joel, and maybe they'll get something out of it too.
Well,
So I'm hoping for that.
There's something that I've been thinking a lot about just during the last 5 years of Take3. The way, I don't know if people understand this, but the way that we are trained is it can't help but to make you very stoic. So I don't know if you've seen symphony orchestras and you look around and everybody kind of has that kind of blank face. And I know that they're feeling the music, but I understand what that blank face is because I lived it for 20 years. What it is every note that we play being under a magnifying glass, and every note we play having to be just this way. And it kind of takes a little bit of the soul away. And for me, my number one goal, my only goal for the show is I want to move people. They should feel unbelievable joy when it's appropriate, unbelievable sadness when it's appropriate. I want to express that. And the way that I was trained really made it hard to do that. So I had to take time to get out of this, perfection zone where all I cared about was playing every note perfectly in the way that it was meant to be played. And now be able to just let go, because you don't know or care about the note that I missed, 3 phrases ago, but you do care that I'm in the moment 100% and I feel everything that I'm doing. And you have to see and hear that.
I think that's why why so much of the audience was so struck by your performance at Violins of Hope. And it brought that moment to us in a way that many of us who have seen classical music before and seen live orchestras perform, that we got to witness you. And Laura is sort of the same way. She's very much into that. It's an expression, and you express yourself both physically and mentally and through the instrument as well. And we got to see that, and that was transformative for some of us. And so, that it was, you bring that. And I think that's,
well, you're obviously doing a good job with Ruth.
Yeah. I'm such a fan.
It's coming across. I was going to ask you, Lindsay, when you go to see live classical music, then, or what's that experience like for you? Are you enjoying it? Are you listening to every note? Are you trying to feel it, or what? How do you listen?
Unfortunately, when I hear certain songs, certain pieces of music, I have a certain anxiety associated with that, because for me to walk out on stage in front of a symphony orchestra became a really stressful experience. And how on earth are you going to be able to feel the emotions of the song if your number one overriding feeling is anxiety? So when I go and I see a violin soloist playing with orchestra, unfortunately, I'm not enjoying it as much as probably my neighbor, because at the first opening, notes of the orchestral tutti, my whole body is like not happy. It's just anxious, and I just am taken back to this being my career and this being my life. And it felt like so important. It felt like everything was resting on this moment. In a way like the Olympic people probably feel, but of course it's not nearly as important as that. But to your body and the way you're feeling, you can trick yourself into thinking that it is. So that being said, no, I don't enjoy hearing violin soloists, but I enjoy almost every other kind of classical music. I enjoy symphonies. I enjoy everything else because I don't have that association of negativity and stress. So I still love classical music, and, we do a lot of outreach and we play for, thousands of kids every year. And my hope is that we make sure that there is an audience for true classical music, because if we don't present it to young kids at an early age in a way that's palatable to them, we may really have a problem. And our local orchestras are really struggling and trying to figure out how to gain a broader audience, because generally the audiences that hear symphony orchestras are aging. And so what happens if we don't have a new crop that's brought in? So we play for a lot of kids. And I hope that when we combine Bach and tell them about our history and talk a little bit about the historical significance of this music, combining it with Justin Bieber, maybe we're presenting it in a way that's going to excite them. And maybe when they're adults, they will be interested in classical crossover, classical music, and be patrons of the arts.
I sure hope so. I sometimes feel the same way as a presenter when I'm watching music or performance in our space. I'm so concerned with, is it sounding good? Are the levels right? Is the audience, getting what they need? And it's hard for me to enjoy it too. So I have to really kind of let go of all of that in order to enjoy things sometimes. But luckily, it's such a good space for the things that we do. Oftentimes it just naturally, I can eventually enjoy it after I kind of get over everything else. Now you mentioned the Olympics earlier. Now you have an Olympic history too, is that right? Did I read that correct?
So I, as a child and teenager, played racquetball, and I was super into it, so much so that I was actually homeschooled for 7th through 12th grade because I was practicing the violin many hours a day and practicing racquetball many hours a day. And I was a part of the junior Olympic team, and we would go train in Colorado Springs at the training center. And I would see all these, famous Olympian gymnasts that I just thought, wow, this is incredible. And they would be there, having lunch. And so I would go there for a couple of weeks every summer and train. And unfortunately, I had a knee injury when I was 18, and I just gave it up completely because I think to be a musician and to be in this field, it requires everything. So to have part of your energy going to, trying to be a great racquetball player, it just didn't make sense anymore, especially going into college at Colburn. It just wasn't meant to be a long-term part of my life.
What between racquetball and violin, as you were learning growing up, was there one that was more challenging than the other?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think violin is more challenging because you have to sit in a room by yourself and practice everything in all the little details. Whereas with racquetball, you could do doubles, you could do singles, you had someone else, some social interaction during that time, and you're getting your energy out and running around, and it's a game after all. So definitely the violin was more challenging, but I think that they helped each other because for big racquetball tournaments, you'd have these big moments like I'm going to make or break it in this moment with an audience. And so I think learning to deal with the nerves and to really be your best in those moments where it really counts, and how to learn to forget about something that went wrong in the previous point and move on. I think those were really important skills that helped violin, and vice versa, performing a concert where it's like, this is the moment where it matters, and staying calm and really feeling like you're in control of that moment was really helpful for both. So I'm really happy to have that experience.
Thank you for sharing that. That's very cool. I was reading about you and I'm like, wow, that is so neat. You have lots of talents, hidden talents, apparently. I also read another story. I want to make sure this is true, that you had a violin that was stolen out of a car, and it was kind of made some big news because it was a pretty special violin. Is that right?
Well, it's a sore topic for me because, you're not supposed to ever leave an instrument in a car. So that violin was on loan to me when I turned 16, and my family had moved from Houston, Texas to California so that I could not only study at the Colburn School, but also play on this very special instrument, which was a sanctus seraphim instrument built in the 1700s in Italy. And this is like the gold standard for violins. I also had a very special French Tort bow in that case that I left in this car. So all in all, it was over $1 million worth of equipment. And I was, a kid at the time. And I left it in the car to do, for 5 minutes, and came back, and the window was smashed in But we realized early on that they didn't want the violin because my backpack was also taken. And if you knew what was in this violin case, you wouldn't be worrying about this kid's backpack as well. So, yes, we put it out on news. We put out that we're offering a $10,000 reward and no questions asked. And someone brought it in 3 or 4 days later and said they found it near a dumpster. Who knows what's true, but we paid the $10,000. And luckily and amazingly, the donor of this violin who lent it to me for all these years, he let me continue to use it. Because the thing is, and I don't think people realize this, these instruments are insured, but oftentimes not insured for being left unattended in a motor vehicle. And I actually didn't know that it had that stipulation that you wouldn't get the money back in that particular instance. But I learned it very soon after this happened. And so it was just going to be lost if we didn't find it.
Wow, what a life lesson. And I'm so glad you recovered it. That must have been such a relief when that happened.
It was no damage done to the violin, and I continued to play on it all throughout my years at Colburn and after. And now I own my own very special violin. It's a French 1845 Violin violin modeled after Guarneri violin. And it's really interesting. And I often wonder, how would the maker, Violin, how would he feel about the way that I'm using his instrument? And I like to think that he would be happy that something so old is still relevant today, but being used in a way that's relevant for society today. And so I like to think that he would be really interested to hear this music on this violin, but who knows?
I'm sure he would. Is there anything you're listening to right now that you're excited about I always like to ask musicians, what are you listening to and into right now?
So I spend half the time in Los Angeles and half my time in New York. So I spend a lot of time in traffic, and I listen to music when I'm sitting in bumper to bumper traffic. And I always have my eyes and ears open for that song that becomes an earworm in my ear, and for a song that I can't help but play on repeat, repeat, repeat. Because when that happens, I know that I have found our next Take3 song. And I work with a really good friend of mine on arranging this music for Take3. And he's brilliant at being able to realize the chord structure of a pop song and how that structure can relate to a classical piece of music. And so he gives me all these amazing ideas. Hey, what about if we take this part of Winter Vivaldi and we put it in this section? And every time you come to the chorus, we actually bring in the winter instead. And so in that way, I'm constantly looking out for the next hit that is going to be our next song. And we don't play any pop songs that don't have a twist. So there's always got to be some kind of catch. It has that classical twist to it. And with this show, we're coming with our percussion player. We actually have many percussion players throughout the US, but we're so excited to be able to add that element, because talk about, pop music has to have that great beat. And so thanks to you for having us bring our fourth for this show.
So what's your latest earworm that you got stuck in your head right now?
Well, actually, our what we're working on right now is a AC/DC cover, and it is going to be with Vivaldi. There are a few different Vivaldi quotes that we have put in there, and I'm not going to say what it is because it might just open our show in Liverpool. But if you like AC/DC, you're gonna love this.
Oh, that's awesome. Fair enough. Well, I want to say thank you, Lindsay, for joining us. I do want to do one last thing, if that's okay. We like to do a game with everybody that we interview. Yes. It's really easy, and we call it either or. And so this is just a way to get to know you better. So I'm going to give you a series of options, and you just say which one you prefer.
Okay. Right?
So if I say...
Is this a time test?
It's not timed. Don't worry. And you're not going to get graded on this. There's no wrong answers. It's just a way to get to know you better. So if I was to say fruits or vegetables, what would you say?
Both. I'm
Both.
sorry. I'm already failing this test.
Yeah, that first one's wrong. Okay. Apple or PC?
Oh, apple.
Apple. Okay. Coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Chocolate or vanilla?
Chocolate.
We're going to get off the food here. Sunrise or sunset?
I cannot choose that. Come on, man.
You can't. Wow. Okay.
No. I love them both so much. I mean, I literally try to catch both every day if I can. I'm a morning person and evening, so.
All right, fair enough. Los Angeles or New York?
Los Angeles.
All right. Fall or spring?
Spring.
Dogs or cats?
Dogs.
Beethoven or Mozart?
Beethoven.
Jazz or blues?
Blues.
You're flying through this. You're going to get the time test pretty quick here. Major key or minor key?
Major.
Oh, you're the one of the few people to say major. Yeah. Television or film?
Television.
By the way, I also read that you've done a lot of soundtracks in film and TV, and yeah. I'm watching the show right now on Netflix called The Witcher, and I believe that it's hard for me. It's a confusing show. I'm trying really hard to follow it, but I do like the music. So thank you for helping with that.
I couldn't make it through even 5 minutes. It was way too violent. And so even when I would see the screen as I was playing the soundtrack, I had to really, it was too much for me because you cannot undo things you've seen. And I actually protect my mind from seeing certain things. So I had to basically close my eyes all during performing that soundtrack, and I could not watch the show. But that soundtrack was like #1 on the Sony charts for many weeks.
There's a lot of good music in that film, and
yeah.
that's a big part of that show. That's a big part of the series is the music. So
yeah.
Anyways, random thought there. M&Ms or Reese's Pieces?
Reese's Pieces.
Yes. The Rolling Stones or the Beatles?
Beatles.
Okay. Racquetball or violin?
Violin.
Violin by a mile. Okay. And then my last one is Livermore at the Bankhead Theater on January 19th or anywhere else in the world that night.
Livermore, yes!
Yay!
I can't wait. You know, we met a few months before the Violins of Hope. And, you know, as musicians, we're always trying to, you know, get the next gig. And I'm just so grateful to you guys for having Take3. And, you know, it's going to be such a fun show. We cannot wait. You have such an amazing space there. And I know that we're going to have a really special evening there in January.
Well, thank you. We really appreciate your time, and we're looking forward to the show.
Yeah, we're all super excited about it.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys. Have a good one.
You're off the hook. Take care.
Oh my God. Lindsay Deustch she's just amazing. I'm such a stan, as the young kids say.
Yeah, she was very cool. I just love that she's making the music that she does and performing it in a way that people can really connect with it.
Yeah.
And how she weaves in the classical composer with the modern music in a way that's so accessible, and that seems to be her goal to do.
I think it's interesting because it's not just accessible to audience members, but it's also something that she really connects with, and it just comes out when she talks about it. And I think we're going to see something very special on stage when Take3 will be here at the Bankhead, live at the Bankhead on Friday, January 19th at 8 p.m. People can get their tickets at livermorearts.org or by calling the box office at 925-373-6800. Come to the show. It's really going to be a special one.
Yes.
And thank you
on my list.
Thank you for booking this one, Chris. I think there's a lot of happy people about it. I'm Ruth Eggerman.
And I'm Chris Carter.
Thanks for joining us.